Thank you everyone for coming to this Australians for Better Government event called We the People. It's a pleasure to be here at the East Cessnock Bowling Club. My name is Tripp. I'm the President of Australians for Better Government, and what I would like to start off is by thanking all of you. It's not easy coming out to a political event on a Sunday, but here we are because we care about this country and we care about the direction that this country is going in. I also want to thank the East Cessnock Bowling Club for hosting us, even though when I walked in they said, "We don't have your booking." We got it all sorted out in the end. So thank you for this nice club, and it's great to have it in such a nice venue like this. I also want to acknowledge two councillors here, Sue Dickinson and also Quinton King. Thank you for coming along. It's a pleasure to have you here. And also our great speakers, Stuart Bonds, who is a local here, you should all know Stuart, but also Katy, McCallum and Dr. Christopher Reynolds, who have travelled all the way down from Queensland at great expense. So thank you both for coming along. I also just want to acknowledge the Australians for Better Government Committee, because they do a lot of hard work behind the scenes. It's a volunteer organisation, Australians for Better Government. We don't get paid for it. We all work full time and a lot of hours, and any skerrick or spare time that we have, we do devote to the group. So I just want to acknowledge Tony Bowyer, our secretary, who's running around here. Oh, there she is. Mark Neugebauer in Adelaide, who's our Vice President. Lee Evans, who's in the UK, he was unable to make it. Angus Wunderschief, Katy McCallum, and also Deborah Yule. So thank you to those guys, they helped me a lot. Now, on today's agenda, as I mentioned, we've got some great speakers. They spoke very, very well yesterday. I'm sure it's going to be even better today. And if you are interested in watching this footage back, or if you want to share it around, it will be filmed and broadcast on the ABG YouTube channel, and also Commanding the Narrative. You can find it there, commandingthenarrative.com. So a little bit about Australians for Better Government before we get into it. We're a non-partisan advocacy organisation dedicated to reforming Australia's political processes. Through education, public events and policy advocacy, ABG works to promote greater accountability, transparency and genuine representation in government to benefit all Australians. We believe that members of Parliament often serve their own ambitions or the will of their political party rather than faithfully representing the interests and concerns of their constituents. No longer can we rely on the politicians to drive any sort of change in this country. ABG is determined to begin the discussion on how we can reform and optimise our system and make change for the better. And the most important thing, and this is what we get asked a lot, we are not a political party. We're an advocacy group, separate from the political parties. We try and be non-partisan where we can. It's very hard, but that's what ABG is all about. So if you are a member of a political party, you can be also a member of Australians for Better Government. Now, what our mission is we want to reform the Constitution. We want to ensure a true separation of powers. We want to educate Australia in civics, and that's something that we have been confronted with since starting ABG in 2025. Just how much that education part of it is going to be part of what we do, because a lot of people really just don't understand our system. We want to empower voters. We want to enshrine our freedoms. And we also want to instill pride in Australia. Celebrate this country. It is a great country and it doesn't get celebrated enough. Now, you can support Australians for Better Government by becoming a member or donating, and what that will help us do, it will help us drive social media campaigns to get our message out there. It also helps us hold events and conventions like this one today, helps us print flyers and materials and different things. It also helps us travel the country to different events, spreading the word and what we are proposing at ABG, and it helps with billboarding and advertising. So if you would like to contribute in any way, that's where the money goes back to when you support Australians for Better Government. Now, why did we call it We the People? A lot of people have said that's an American term. Well, we couldn't call it Whereas the People. It just doesn't have the same ring to it. So we've gone with We the People, and what it really means is government is meant to represent the people, and the government is meant to be an instrument of the people. We, the people, have the power, and we, the people, should have a say in the direction of government. So that's what Australians for Better Government is all about, and hopefully that's what this event today will be all about, talking about ideas and solutions on how we can better optimise our system of government. So enough from me for now. I'm going to introduce our first speaker. I first heard her speaking at Martin Place. I still remember it because it was such an impactful moment for me, hearing this woman in full flight. And I was like, who is that? And I went up and introduced myself straight away. She's a mum. She works very, very hard. This lady works 7 days a week, 16-hour days running her small business. So she understands the pressures that everyday Australians and business owners are under, especially from government. And most importantly, she's travelled the country speaking to people adversely affected by the renewables rollout. She's the president of Let's Rethink Renewables. Please welcome Katy McCallum.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, my own husband doesn't speak that nicely of me, I don't think. Well, g'day everyone. Yes, I am Katy McCallum, and I am a Queenslander. Please don't hold that against me. So, I've travelled down here this weekend because we had a speaking event yesterday as well. And Stephen is right, I do work 7 days a week, and I've had to employ staff to look after my shop so I could come down this weekend. But the reason why is because what I have to tell you today is very important. And when you leave here today, you're going to have a few different things that have been told to you, but this in particular, I believe, is one of the biggest issues that this nation faces right now, and that's the rollout of industrial-sized renewable energy projects across our nation. So I am the president of a group called Let's Rethink Renewables. A few years ago, we kicked off with a group called the National Rational Energy Network, and we held the Reckless Renewables rallies. So a few ladies here I know attended the one in Canberra, and that evolved a little bit more, and we created a billboard campaign up in Queensland called Let's Rethink Renewables. And this was the first billboard. Is this my future? The wildlife habitats are unrenewable. Once they're gone for good. And this was our second billboard that we created. There's a friend of mine, Jim Wilmot, he's with Property Rights Australia. He and I did a whole heap of fundraising to get these billboards going, and we were going to roll them out in the Gympie region where we come from, and that's all it was going to be, just something local. Suddenly, we ended up with nearly $50,000 donated to our cause, which was unbelievable. Every single cent of that came from hard-working farmers, local people in our area. Jim brought on an amazing graphic designer from down in Sydney, and he said, this needs to go bigger, guys. This is an amazing message that needs to get out to Australians, that Australia is under threat, that the things that are about to be damaged irreparably are not renewable. And that's how we came up with the Unrenewable campaign. And he helped us to develop what we believe are the 5 foundations that this nation is built on. And these industrial-sized renewable energy projects, they're going to destroy these pillars, these foundations of the Australian nation. That's why we must protect them, because they're unrenewable. Once they're gone for good. So these were the 5 pillars that we came up with, and hopefully you'll all agree with this. We believe that the productive farmlands of Australia, the rural landscapes of Australia, our wildlife habitats, our strong communities, and the most important one, our way of life is unrenewable. This way of life that we all live here in this amazing country, it is not anywhere else in the world. And it is currently being destroyed in rural areas around Australia. So once it's gone for good. So I'm not a scientist, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an ex-government policy advisor. I am just a citizen of this nation who saw what was going on and decided it was time to use my voice and speak out. I am an ex-police officer, don't hold that against me either, but I was with the Queensland Police for a very long time, but nearly 17 years altogether I was with them for up in Queensland. So all I've come to tell you today is that there is a human cost and a community cost to this rollout of the net zero policies and the emissions reduction policies that the federal government currently has in place. And just as a reminder to everybody, in case you didn't already know, our government has signed us up to the United Nations and has told them that by the year 2035, so not very far away, we're going to reduce our emissions 62 to 70% underneath our 2005 levels by the year 2035. By the year 2050, we will be net zero, which is really hard for a person like me from the bush to understand, because I look out at the millions of hectares of land out there covered in trees, and I'm pretty sure we're already net zero. Pretty sure. I'm sure that you'll all agree with me on that. Yeah. So the question is, how do we get here? How do we end up with an amazing nation like Australia that's currently being destroyed by industrial-sized renewable energy projects? And you may all know about this already, but back in the 90s, the United Nations, that amazing organisation that everybody around the world thinks is going to save us all, the United Nations developed the Framework Convention for Climate Change. So they got together in 92 and they said, we're going to save the planet, because apparently it was dying. I was one of those ones in school that got taught there was an ozone layer hole above us here in Australia. Does everybody remember that? Does anybody know where the ozone layer hole is now? It seems to have disappeared. And they rolled that out to us at Gatton High School where I went to school and told us, join Greenpeace, that will fix it. So we all went home and got our $20 off our mums and came back and joined Greenpeace the next day and thought we'd save the world. But so the framework for climate change, that resulted in a couple of other conventions that were held. And you all know these. So we had the Kyoto Protocol. Has everybody heard of that? Yep. And then we had the Paris Agreement. So everybody hears the Paris Agreement now. Everybody talks about the Paris Agreement. So those two conventions or protocols are universal. Everybody on the planet has signed up to them. But there is an exception to the Paris Agreement. There's been a country in the world who's pulled out of it once and then they rejoined and now they've pulled out again. Any ideas who that country is? Yep. Good old Mr. Trump. So in his first administration, he immediately pulled out of the Paris Agreement, and now Biden got them back in, he's pulled out again. So what that says to me is that a functioning nation is able to remove themselves from the Paris Agreement. So you have to ask the question, why aren't we removing ourselves from the Paris Agreement? I'm pretty sure it's not going to affect us in any way. We'll still wake up tomorrow, the sun will still rise, there'll still be food to eat, there'll still be oxygen to breathe. So it's very concerning that we can't get out of it. So those conventions are legally binding, apparently. That's what we're told. So that's why we can't get out of them. And the thing that I'm not sure all Australians understand just yet is that these agreements, they are affecting and infiltrating every single aspect of your life and have been for nearly 30 years. Whether you know it or not. Every single thing that goes on in your day, from the cup of coffee you drink, to the fuel you put in your vehicle, to the electrical switches you turn on when you get to work to get the air conditioning going, it is all controlled in some way by government policies that have been dictated to by these conventions from the United Nations. Every bit of it. It is a woke web that has come down on top of us and is controlling our lives. In fact, it's madness. That's what it is. It's madness. You would not do this to yourself if you had the option to sign up to these types of agreements. You would laugh at them, you'd rip them up and you'd throw them in the trash can. So I always like to give this example to everybody of something that's going on in your life and you don't even realise. So has anybody seen an EV on the road today? They're out there. I've seen 3 Teslas in the main street of Cessnock this morning. Yeah, they're everywhere. And now there's a new law in Queensland. They've got to have the little blue triangle on the number plate. Is that down here as well? Yeah, so you can spot them a mile away. So without even realising, for several years now, your tax money has been subsidising the purchase of those vehicles. You probably already know this. So people who've bought an EV, not only did they get a subsidy if they bought it privately, but up there in Queensland we have RemServe. I'm pretty sure you've got something similar down here. It's a salary sacrificing program where government staff like police, ambulance officers, nurses, teachers, whoever can salary sacrifice their mortgage repayments or their car repayments, their laptop computer, their electricity bill, comes off their taxable income before they have the tax applied to their income. So a mate of mine who's a serving cop up in Queensland, he goes to buy a new car for his wife recently through RemServe, and it was a no-brainer for him. He got her an EV, even though he didn't even want one. So there you go. There's a coercion of the private market right here, because there was a $16,000 rebate for him to have this tiny car that was an EV. Got paid in a couple of increments, and then he got an assured payout of that car after 2 years that was well above what it was going to be worth. So why would he not do that? So how many people in this nation have been coerced financially to buy an EV, which is now causing everybody to go, I can't charge it up. The government hasn't put enough charging plugs in everywhere. So now what do we have? We've got a mad dash to put in charging points around Australia. So can you see how these United Nations protocols are actually slowly, silently, fatally getting into every part of our nation at the local, state and national levels. And they are creating the world that you live in while you're sleeping. And you wake up the next day and they're doing things and you don't even know. That's why we need to get out of the Paris Agreement.
The charging stations need a diesel generator backup though.
It's quite ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah, it's ridiculous. So I guess I got involved in all of this because obviously I had been a police officer. I quit and I bought a local shop to spend more time with my children, who I don't even see anymore because I'm doing this. And that's because I come from a place called Kilkeven, and the same thing happened to us. Everybody up there is living this beautiful, idyllic rural lifestyle. Suddenly, the letters arrive in the mailbox. The Queensland Government-owned corporation, Queensland Hydro and Powerlink, and the private company BP Lightsource are coming to destroy our region. And that is what they're doing. They're destroying it. So when I woke up to what was going on, having been a cop for so many years, I was pretty aware that there's a lot of really shitty bureaucrats and managers high up in government positions who do things and make decisions that are not for our good. It's for their resume and for their own egos. And so I went, well, they are not destroying our region. And I jumped on the bandwagon, created this action group called Kilkeven Action Group. And the reason we did that was because I hope everybody can see this. This used to be a functioning, stunning, huge family-owned cattle property. This is just one part, and it's about to be doubled. So Fraser Island, as the crow flies, is about 80 k's out that way. So we're very close to the coast, just a little bit west of Gympie. Now, since this was taken, we've got a giant battery energy storage system that's been built the whole way along there. All of that land down there will soon be panels, and they've purchased all the land on the other side so that they can join it up to this part, which is down the road a bit further. And if you look carefully over to the north, you'll see the other half of the solar farm up there now. And they own all of this land, which used to produce beef that went to the shops in the city to feed the people of Australia. So what makes me really angry and makes my blood boil when I put this up on social media is that you get these keyboard warriors who make comments like, it's just one farm, who cares, whatever, it was flogged out, the soil was no good. Well, first of all, that's a lie, because it's easy for a person from the city to look at that dark brown grass and go, oh, that country's useless. No, it's not. That's winter feed right there. What I need you all to understand, and I need everybody to start spreading this message around this whole nation, is that every single time one of those farms gets sold, that's 2 or 3 farms there, it's like a white ant nest that gets into your house. The white ants get in, and you don't really notice them to begin with, and then they start to slowly creep up the framework, and then you might notice that the walls are moving a little bit, and you think, what's going on? And then before you know it, your entire frame of your house has been eaten out and your house is unlivable. And that is what these farms are doing to this country. Australia will eventually be unlivable. Not in the next 5 years or the next 10 years, but if this continues at the rate that it's going at, there will not be any grass-fed beef left for anybody to eat. And yes, people have said to me in the past, oh, you're so dramatic. Why are you so dramatic about it? Well, I'll tell you right now, for the last 7 years since I left the police service, I stand inside of my little shop every day on the Wide Bay Highway, and about 20 metres from where I stand is the Wide Bay Highway. It's the gateway to central Queensland. And that road used to be cattle truck after cattle truck after cattle truck. Has anybody noticed how expensive beef is these days? There's a reason why, and it's not just because of electricity and diesel costs. It's a supply and demand issue. There is nowhere near as much beef coming down that highway anymore at all. And one of the other reasons that happens is because the properties out west are being sold off to companies overseas so they can sequester carbon, and then they can be carbon neutral. So go home and Google that one, because there are currently properties out west here in Australia owned by overseas companies so they can write off their emissions back in their own home country where they're from. That's another thing that makes my blood boil. So having seen the cost of what this has done to the people of Australia, I have met and spoken to people from Western Australia, South Australia, Tasmania, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland. This is happening everywhere. It is not isolated. There are renewable energy zones, but this is happening outside of those as well. And the other take home I really want you to understand is that for property owners or even small landowners near these giant compounds, what happens is the government staff members or the company staff members, they come in, they wave a big lolly bag in front of the first property owner and they get them to sell off. And then they go next door to the next person and they say to that person, well, your neighbour sold out and the guy over the back's going to sell out. So if you don't sell out, your house is going to be worthless. And that happens. Could you imagine if that sort of behaviour was done to people in the city? There would be outrage. It's going on in my hometown right now. There's a Chinese company trying to buy up one side of our town for a battery, and that is exactly what the Chinaman, who can barely speak English, is knocking on doors telling people. So when I was in the police, the biggest thing that we faced every day was domestic violence. And I don't say this because I'm trying to take away about how important domestic violence or getting rid of domestic violence is. But we had it drummed into our heads to look for it every time we went to a job. So the definition of it was said to us over and over again, you know, threats of or acts of physical violence, willful damage, intimidation, coercion, physical coercion, financial coercion, emotional coercion, gaslighting. Those things in every state and territory in this country are illegal to commit against another person. There's laws in place. But our governments turn a blind eye, don't they, when their own government-owned corporation staff members or these international companies who they rolled the red carpet out to turn up and start doing that to our citizens. Because a lot of the people where I come from and all the other places where I've spoken to people and I sit in on meetings and listen to their stories, they're in exactly the same boat. They may be a aged pensioner whose wife or husband has passed and they're living on their 20-acre block, just growing their tomatoes, living out their life. And then suddenly, Chinaman turns up and knocks on the door and says, if you don't sell to me now and sign this contract, you'll have nothing left. What in God's name are we doing, allowing these companies to come in and do that to our own citizens of our own country? It is just wrong, and it is going on. Don't think that this is over traumatised at all, because it is going on. I can find people who can tell you these stories. I've stood in front of grown men in their 50s and 60s while the tears have run down their face while they've told me what's happened to them. These people have worked their entire lives to get to this point so that they can retire and live their life out on the property they bought or their hobby farm, and now they've got it threatened by that stuff that you guys just saw there on the screen. It's an actual abomination. But this leads me to what we are here to talk about today, and that is what we, the people, can do to change this and make sure it doesn't continue. I'm pretty sure everybody knows what we can do to change it. We need to get the clowns who are from the circus that took over Parliament House out of power. That's pretty obvious. But what we also need to do, like Stephen has just said, is we need some sort of constitutional reform. We need to start talking to people about how we can ensure that this sort of thing never happens again. Because at the moment, we've got a bloke in charge of the Climate Change, Environment, Energy and Water Department. His name's Chris Bowen. You'll all be familiar with him. Now, he didn't do a job interview to get the position that he holds. I mean, the guy's got a economics degree, a master's in international relations, and he can speak Indonesian. Is it Indonesian? Yeah, he can speak Indonesian. So I've met these other blokes. Their names Professor Ian Plimer, Professor Stephen Wilson and Dr. Peter Ridd. Now, I'm pretty sure if they stuck them on a panel to be interviewed for the position of the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, that those three blokes would get the job like that, if it was on merit and knowledge and experience. But no, we've got Chris Bowen. So we've handed the reins of the most important department, the department that makes sure we've got the necessities of life, water, food, soil, air. We handed the reins to a bloke who doesn't even know how to ride the frigging horse. He gets up on the saddle and he just falls off. He gets on the TV and he lies and he says things like, I'm yet to find anybody in a rural community who's against renewable energy projects. My good friend Shay, who came down from Queensland, have we met anybody who's for them? I think I might have met 2 people. No. And that's because they've signed up to take a very big amount of money. Yeah, there is no one. Nobody wants this stuff in their backyards, especially when they realise that we already have power stations with coal mines right next door that can power those stations for the next several hundred years. And we're turning them off and blowing them up to bring this rubbish in its place. It's madness. It's absolute madness. And it's all coming from some protocols that we signed up to, which were written by the United Nations. And the people who signed us up to those protocols were the politicians who were in power, Liberal and Labor. So we need to remember that, and we need to work out a way in the future so that a man who does not know how to ride a horse doesn't try and get up in the saddle ever again and try to take the reins, because it's going to go bad, really bad. It's bad now. So I'm pretty sure everybody here would have had a look at the Constitution at some point. My big question to everybody, and I'd love for people to go and research this and help me find the answer to this, but there's some loose sections in 51 of the Constitution that allow for the federal government to tell the state governments what to do. But up until the 90s, when those United Nations frameworks began, the states looked after their own electricity. They had energy sovereignty in their state, which to me makes sense because it's a lot easier if you've got a smaller area with a smaller department to look after, rather than combining into one giant grid. Makes sense, doesn't it? That you would be able to look after a smaller population more easily. So from what I can tell, I don't even understand how the federal government has the constitutional power to dictate to the states. It appears that there's levers being pulled in the background, perhaps, lollybags like the developers roll out, maybe some threats of funding being pulled if you don't agree. But what has literally happened is our premiers and our who's the Prime Minister, the Chief Minister in the Northern Territory, the Chief Minister, they seem to have just handed over the energy sovereignty of our states to the Prime Minister and the Energy Minister. And that doesn't seem right to me. So if everybody can start to ask those questions of their local members, their councillors, their federal members, I believe that we can get change if we can all push that one topic, if we can get that into the minds of everybody. How the hell is the federal government continuing to make these decisions for us? Where are they getting their constitutional power to do so? So if I can plant that seed in your head and you can go and think about that after today, and if you've got a magic answer, I'd love to hear from you, because I believe that that might be the key on how we fix this. So let's rethink renewables. You can look it up online, letsrethinkrenewables.org. Up in Queensland, we've got a really generous guy who gave us 3 big shipping containers. We've stuck them out in key places with these big banners on the outsides. Our dream is that Australia, from one end to the other, would be coated with these, reminding everybody that that koala's home is unrenewable once you take it, that our strong communities are unrenewable once you destroy them, because you cannot rebuild a community that took 150 years to grow. That they're such complex and beautiful things, communities, country communities, city communities too, but out in the country, once you take away the kids from the school, the local fire service, all the volunteer organisations, there is no community left. So we want to get these up all around Australia. We need to get the message out. Those 5 pillars, our productive farmlands, our rural landscapes, our wildlife habitats, our strong communities, and our our way of life. It is unrenewable. Once it is gone for good. We must save them. Thank you very much.
Wow, what a speech. That was fantastic. Please, another round of applause for the President of Let's Rethink Renewables, Katy McCallum. Now, one of the things that really drives me nuts when you look at the federal parliamentarians is how many of them that were involved in the union movement or were former political staffers. What experience did they really have in the real world? Have they run a business? Have they paid someone? Have they employed someone? Have they had to go through getting a mortgage when you're having to get up at 5 a.m. in the morning and work 2 jobs and look after a family? So we need more real everyday Australians in the parliament, just like Katy and just like our next speaker, who works in the mining industry. He's a family man. And you should all know him because he rose to prominence at the 2019 Hunter by-election where he almost won that seat, and he repeated the performance again at the last federal election, which is a tremendous feat for a minor party candidate, or maybe not a minor party anymore. But he is one of the most recognised members of One Nation in New South Wales. So please welcome Stuart Bonds.
Geez, that was a good intro. I like that. So I was going to get up here and do a bit of talk about renewables, but there's not much point in doing that. Katy's just knocked it out of the park. So we did go down to the Central West Arana, and I was also equally as horrified by what's going on down there. And we're looking at Energy Co and the Hunter Transmission Project, which is going on in the Hunter, and it's going to be going on the next few years, and you're going to see a lot of it knocking down the top here of beautiful rainforest up in the Wattigans. So that's coming to a future near you unless we can stop it. But I'm going to change tacks a little bit. So we are being attacked on multiple fronts here, and this is typically the way the lefties do it, is they're getting us on the energy front. We're arguing about gender. We're arguing about culture, but I'm here to talk about the culture part. We are led to believe that this country is a racist colony. It's built on stolen land by a group of individuals that had the White Australia policy till the 70s. It was all white people. But we're also led to believe that Australia was built by immigrants at the same time, right? So which one is it, you know? So we've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people a year coming into the country, and we're told that we have a housing shortage, you know? These things are just, the lunatics are truly running the asylum. So recently we got to look into the way that some people are living out in central Australia, mainly the Aboriginal community. There has been hundreds of billions of dollars have been thrown at this problem, and when this young girl went missing and they invited the news crews out there and they did a walk through the home, a lot of commentary online was about the living conditions that that young girl was living in. And yet you have the Prime Minister and his ministers go up, you know, they go up to the, is it Gadigal? What's the big thing they go up to where they pay thousands of dollars a head to cover themselves? Garma, their Garma festival, cover themselves in smoke and pretend like they're doing something about these Aboriginal communities when really they're just doing nothing at all. Yet, while we have this problem going on to Australians in our own country, we're bringing in thousands of people from Gaza, refugees, ISIS brides, and millions of migrants while people are living in third world conditions in our own country. It is a disgrace. It should not be happening, and this is some attention needs to be put onto this. Now, Pauline brought this up many years ago about this welfare. Aboriginal welfare was really white people welfare. It was white people ripping off the Aboriginal welfare system and feathering their own nests, and there was no money getting to the ground. And that was proven again where we have people living in third world conditions in our own country. It shouldn't stand. A house divided, it can't stand. It's a house divided against itself, it cannot stand, you know. And we are bringing in people that do not agree with our culture. They want to change our culture. They want things to be the way they are in the countries that they fled from. You know, it's a disgrace that we are bringing these people in, and yet the Aboriginal Australians that need our help are not getting it. Now, on the energy front, you know, I am a coal miner. I've been in the industry for about 20 years now. I feel old when I say that. And they say that it ain't what you know that'll get you into trouble. It's not what you don't know that'll get you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And Katy pointed out that we have individuals running these systems that don't know anything about them. And this is a serious, serious problem. Now, you notice this when people come in to different operations and they change the management upstairs and they try to change the way that the business is run. And it can drive that business into the ground. And that's what we've got at the moment. The government's operating like a business. It's taken over the affairs of private institutions, what should be private institutions, energy companies, transmission companies, and it's doing the bidding for them. And it's terrible at it. Right? The government is terrible. It is inefficient. We know that if you want to stuff a project up, the person to give it to is the government. You know, you look at the blowout of the mother of all white elephants. What's his name? Snowy Hydro 2, Malcolm Turnbull's pet elephant. Gone from $2 billion, going to be the biggest battery in the world, and it should be already operational by now, and we're going to be 10 years behind, and the total cost is going to be $40 billion if you include the transmission line. And they say, oh, you can't include the transmission line into the project. You know, that's a separate project altogether. Well, how is the thing going to ever get the power from where it is into the actual grid? It needs the transmission line. You know, the thing's it is literally a white elephant without the transmission line. So here we got that project. Then we've got the Central Western Rana has blown out from the original $600 million to $6 billion. Right? They're out by a factor of 10 with this stuff. Now, when they told us that we're going to become a renewable energy superpower, we're going to have all these renewable jobs, life's going to be a nirvana, right? You can't believe, they sounds like Donald Trump, right? You can't believe the amount of wealth that we're going to have in this country, you know? We're going to so many renewables jobs. We need all these immigrants because there'll be so many renewables jobs. The opposite is true, right? We're living in opposite land. This is going to drive us into poverty. We are not going to have any jobs. We are not going to have a functioning functioning electricity system. That is what's going to happen. And then because we're going to be in so much debt for all this stuff, the recovery is going to be near on impossible. It is important, and I look at this as a civilisational threat that we are under at the moment from this government. It is a cultural threat and it is an economic threat, right? They are bringing in people that do not like us. And then they are changing our fundamental systems beneath our feet. They are shifting and they are changing them, trying to get blood out of a stone, right? You're trying to create something. Renewables energy superpower does not exist anywhere else in the world, and it is foundational to modern civilization, electricity. Have a look at what's happening over in South Africa. Have these rolling blackouts, right? Your power could, and it's intermittent too, you don't know when it's going to happen to your business, and it'll roll in, and 8 hours later, the power will go off, and then 8 hours later it'll come back on again, and you don't know when in the day this is going to happen. Sometimes it's 3 hours, sometimes you get power all day. How the hell is a society meant to function when that sort of thing's going on? You know, we're getting dirty power into our system, which is, you know, you have your 50 hertz these things need to run on, and it's very, very fine for your CNC machines and your computers and that sort of thing. And when that 50 hertz is interrupted, only slightly, it starts to burn out all your microprocessors. And there's a lot of businesses in Newcastle. Actually got approached by some people that asked me if I knew anything about it. And I did know that it was possible, but I didn't know how widespread the problem was. And these guys are now putting in scrubbers to clean the electricity out of the grid to go into these machinery shops. So we are creating massive, massive problems for ourselves. And the whole time our electricity prices are going up, and we're being told it's because of those coal-fired power stations over there that provided us with reliable electricity for the last 150 years. You know, the lunatics are in charge of the asylum. I said it before, I'll say it again. Look, I want to leave it there. I want to say thank you guys for hosting the event, for putting it on. Thank you guys for all attending. I know it's a Sunday. It's nice weather outside too, which makes it difficult again. Just on the, we had the Nepean by-election last night. I think we're sitting at about 25% of the vote. Now, this was like a blue ribbon Liberal seat down there, so extremely difficult. It was always going to be very hard. I talked to Warren Pickering before it, and I said, look, my personal point of view is if we can get over 20%, you know, that'll be good, because that sort of confirms the polling. And they did a lot better, actually. They got 25%. So I think that there'll be a lot of worried people. Obviously, the media is going to say that's it, like you didn't win, so, you know, you're out of the race. That will not be the topic of conversation around those tables, I can tell you right now. Because if we did that well there, then once we start going west, we start getting into the 30%, and that's when you start winning seats. You know, Liberals are only at 37 or 38% in a blue ribbon seat, so they've got nothing to pat themselves on the back about. So anyway, Farah next weekend, their pre-polls are all week, and Farah's next Saturday, so tune into online or Sky News or something and watch that result coming in, because I think the whole country will be watching that one. So anyway, thank you for the Australians for Better Government, and yeah, I'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Stuart, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens at the next state election next year, and also the federal election coming up as well, when Stuart has another crack at being a candidate. Now, you're going to hear from me now. I'm going to let you know a little bit more about Australians for Better Government. So just firstly, quickly for me, I am the President of Australians for Better Government. I'm also the Vice President of Let's Rethink Renewables and a National Committee member of the Campaign for an Independent Britain, or CIB UK. It's the longest serving institution in the UK dedicated to freedom. And I'm also host of the Commanding the Narrative podcast. So why did we start Australians for Better Government? Because we really feel that there's a fundamental problem with our system of government. The politicians and the policies and the failures that you see on the TV, they're just symptoms of the real problem. So we look at the core issues, our structure of government, and why that needs reforming. So if you can head to australiansforbetter.com and see all our proposals there. I gave a speech at the Central Coast yesterday where I focused very heavily on the Governor-General and the role of the Governor-General, the fact that the Prime Minister is not mentioned in our Constitution and the consequences of that, and also the ministers and how they're appointed, and Chapter 2 of the Constitution, which relates to the executive branch of government. So you can head to our YouTube page or commandingthenarrative.com to watch that speech, but I'm going to give a little bit of a different speech today, just to focus on some of the other areas that we want to see reform. So I'm going to start off by asking you all a question. Why should we want a better government? Anyone? Better future? Yeah. The consequences of a bad government, I think you only need to study history and to see that. I mean, the 20th century, most of the deaths that happened were the result of bad government and bad systems. So what are the benefits of good government? What should we strive towards? Well, we should want a strong, prosperous, safe and free country. a country that is provided all the opportunities to achieve its potential. And we have so much potential in this country, but we haven't even come close, in my opinion, to achieving that potential. We should want a government that protects our culture. It should celebrate it and foster it. It should protect our culture, and it should not make us feel guilty for our culture. We want a government that looks after the individual, protects our freedoms, protects individual freedoms, thoughts and expressions. And every individual in Australia should be given the opportunities to succeed. And lastly, and above all else, government should protect families. It should encourage families. If we want strong, prosperous, safe and free families, and we want a country that we can leave behind for our children and grandchildren. So I'm going to ask you another question. What is government? Does anyone want to have a crack at that one? What is government? Yeah. Well, I hope that's not the I hope that's not the definition, because in my definition is government is meant to be we the people. It's meant to represent the people. It's not meant to be an authoritarian figure up there dictating to us, because the people really have the power.
Citizens taking responsibility of their own affairs.
That's right. Citizens taking responsibility of their own affairs, but also responsibility of government.
What is their affair?
Yeah. So we need a revolution of thinking in this country, and we need to put a lot more focus on our system. But part of that challenge is also education. And that's one of the things that we've really discovered in starting Australians for Better Government, or how much education is needed in civics. Not just for our youth, and we would love to roll out a civics course in the schools, but I think all Australians need a bit of a education in civics and our system. So how do we break the chains of apathy? So many people out there go, oh, I don't really care about politics, I don't focus on politics. Well, you really need to, because a big problem and a reason why this country has gone in the direction that it has is because not enough people are involved and not enough people care, and not enough people are willing to discuss solutions and ideas. They say, I don't want to talk about politics. Okay, don't talk about the parties then. Don't talk about the personalities, but let's start discussing some of the solutions.
So what's changed in the 50 years with why people no longer interested in politics because they weren't 50 years ago?
Well, one of the things that have been said to me, because I wasn't alive 50 years ago, but one of the things is they don't teach civics in schools anymore. So people don't understand the system and they switch off from it. So how do we convince Australians to get better involved in government? Well, one thing is you can educate them. You can motivate them. You can encourage them. You can force them. I mean, when we're forced to vote, but maybe we need to be forced into participating more in government. And it starts by convincing people that government is not adequately representing them. And I don't think that's a hard thing to convince people in. Now, here's a quote. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. Now, that was attributed to John Basil Burnhill in 1914. Also, some people say it's attributed to Thomas Jefferson. So, what do politicians fear? They don't want to lose their seat. And that's where Australians for Better Government come in, because if we have enough members to say to those politicians, hey, come election time, we're going to campaign against you if you don't support our positions, that's where true power comes from. They also fear accountability. And that's one thing we haven't seen enough of, especially since COVID, accountability for government actions. So how do we build accountability into our system? So some of the things that Australians for Better Government are proposing are recall elections. We see this in California. Now, no system's perfect, and that's why we call it Australians for Better Government, not Australians for Perfect Government, because there is no perfect system. We're dealing with human nature, and what might work now might not work in 50 years' time. But that's why we continually need to have these discussions And even if ABG was to get all its proposals through tomorrow, we would still exist to keep having that discussion on whether our system of government is working. So let's say you've got a PM that stands up there at election time and says there will be no carbon tax under the government I lead, and then when they're elected, they bring in a carbon tax. Or another Prime Minister that campaigns against net zero, and then the very next thing he does is fly overseas, come back and says to his party room, we're going to sign up to the Paris Agreement. And the people that voted for those Prime Ministers go, hang on a second, I'm passionately against those issues. You said you weren't going to support them and now you have. That's where a recall election would come in. If there was enough people that were angered at the direction that their government was taking them, or a member of parliament, one in particular, then that would trigger a recall election. And we see that in California. It does work. As I said, no system is perfect. One of the other things that we're proposing is citizens-initiated referenda, and I see some One Nation T-shirts. I know that's one of One Nation's policies. We also believe in binding plebiscites. So that's a vote that cannot be ignored by government. So if there's enough of a groundswell of people wanting to push forward a new policy or something to happen, it could go to a citizens-initiated referenda or a binding plebiscite vote, and then you could see that push through. Now, we've just seen the South Australian election. They have the South Australian Voice to Parliament down there, despite the fact that the people of South Australia voted against the voice referendum. The South Australian state government brought it in anyway. And when they did have that vote, less than 11% of the people eligible actually turned up to vote. So that's a system that's definitely not working. It's clearly against the wishes of the South Australian people. So why can we not then go to a plebiscite to repeal that vote and not just rely on the politicians to make all the decisions? The last thing, and one more thing on citizens-initiated referenda. A lot of people talk about enshrining our freedoms and free speech, and Ralph Babet in the Parliament is trying to push through a referendum to enshrine free speech in the Constitution. He's only asking for a vote. He's not asking for it to be put in there. He's saying, let the people of Australia decide whether or not we want free speech in the Constitution, and the politicians are saying no. Well, if we had citizens-initiated referenda and you had enough support from the Australian people to at least say, let's go to a vote on whether we should enshrine free speech or trial by jury or whatever it might be, then that's where citizens-initiated referenda would come in. Now, another thing that John Ruddick spoke at one of our meetings in Sydney, he raised this. He said we could also have citizens-initiated veto. And Stuart Bonds spoke about the Snowy Hydro too, and how Malcolm Turnbull came out and said it was only going to be $2 billion, but now it's blown out to $42 billion. And people say, well, why don't they just cancel it? And there's precedents for it. When I live in Sydney, when John Bradfield built the Sydney Harbour Bridge, the next stage of that was to build tunnels to the northern beaches and to the eastern suburbs, railway tunnels. Now, if you know anything about Sydney, you would know of how many things that would solve if those projects went ahead with our transport issues. But it didn't go ahead because they had the Depression and the government canned it. So you can go to the city circle now and find abandoned tunnels and abandoned platforms where they built those, but then abandoned it. So why don't they abandon projects like the Snowy Hydro too? Well, the answer is it's a giant battery. And when the wind is blowing, and we do get wind droughts, when it is blowing and when the sun is shining, then you get an abundance of power, because they have to overbuild the net zero system for it to actually work. So that excess power has to go to a battery to get stored. Otherwise, they will need coal plants to continue working. So if they were to cancel the Snowy Hydro too, what happens? The whole net zero rollout also falls over because they don't have the battery technology. And they have to rely on the Snowy Hydro too. So the Australian people, the Australian taxpayers, are now saddled with a project that was originally going to be $2 billion. Now it's $42 billion. It's only 70% complete. Who knows what the total cost will be? And what power do we have to stop it? Because the politicians never will. So that's where citizens-initiated veto will come in. So there are some examples of what we could do, systems that we could bring in to build into our system more accountability. So some other ideas. Direct democracy. What does that mean? Now, this is an example of the ballot paper from the United States when they had their presidential election. And when they go to a presidential election, they not only vote for the president and the vice president, they vote for a whole range of things. They vote for their congressional representatives. They vote for the chief justices to the Supreme Court. They vote for several judges and heads of departments. They even have constitutional amendments in those ballots. So why can't we have the same? We've already got the big ballot papers already. It's not going to hurt to have maybe one more. So maybe there are things that we need to vote on at every election, such as immigration. Now, who here has ever been asked by government what the adequate level of immigration is? The Australian people have never been asked whether they agree with immigration. Now, they might. It might go to an election and people will say, okay, we accept this level of immigration. But that should be the decision of the Australian people, what the adequate level of immigration is. The next thing is treaties. When have the Australian people been asked on whether they support the Paris Agreement, like Katy mentioned? Or I was having a discussion before we started about the Lima Declaration. I couldn't find a logo for that one because it's so old. But were we asked about that as Australian people? Have we been asked about the World Health Organization and whether we want to be a part of that? I would be very, very interested to see what a vote would say if you posed the question to the Australian people of whether we should continue our membership in the United Nations. Now, a lot of Australian people may say it's sensible to be part of the United Nations, but let's put it to a vote. Let's get the Australian people more involved in our system and not just rely on the politicians. State of emergencies. We saw this during COVID. State governments could take away your freedoms under the guise of public health orders. And this made-up term of state of emergencies, I say made up because when did we vote for it? I can't remember it going to an election. When did the people of each state cede their freedoms to state premiers and public health officers? So that should go to a vote. Now, this is something that we plan to work on a lot at Australians for Better Government in the coming weeks and months and years. Taxation. And I might test this out right now by getting a show of hands. If you could choose where your taxation money goes to, would you be happy going for that your taxes going to health? Anyone support that? Yep. Okay. How about defence? Yep. Most people. Education. Yep, people are quite comfortable with that sort of thing. What about welfare? Yep, some people. Some people going like that. Maybe they're not quite sure. What about foreign aid? No?
Depends how much we get back in as an investment.
Yep, well.
Foreign aid can bring back good returns for us.
Well, if this stuff was to go to an election, then those politicians would have to argue those points. But currently they don't. They just send the money off. So we need to build these accountability systems into our system. Now, the last one, a lot of the problems that we're facing, especially economically, is due to government spending. And when have the Australian people been asked what the adequate level of spending is? The Australian people should be setting the debt ceiling. And if the politicians exceed that debt ceiling, guess what happens? We go to a double dissolution. So you're building accountability in. If they're going to spend too much, then they're going to have to go to an election. And what did I say before? What do politicians fear? They fear losing their seats. So you can imagine that they will want to keep spending under control if they're going to lose their position. So, again, we're building accountability into the system, and we need to start having these discussions. We don't have all the ideas, and that's why we hold these events, because each event that we have, we pick up really good ideas from people. So that's what we're trying to do. So what's the next steps for Australians for Better Government? Firstly, we would love for you to join us, because as I said, the stronger that we are, the more members that we have, the more pressure we can put on the politicians. And that's what we want to do. We want to lobby the politicians. We want to get in their face. We want to have meetings with them. We want to propose our positions to them and say, look at all the members we've got behind us. If you don't support what we are proposing, then we're going to campaign against you, or potentially we're going to campaign for you. We want to hold more forums and events like this. We want to hold rallies. We want to educate. I keep saying this. Big part of what we're going to do is educating, and we would love to have some resources to put into a civics course for kids. And most of all, we want to get active. Not just us, but all of you as well. Start having these conversations. You don't have to wait for Australians for Better Government to roll around to your town or your city. You can have these discussions amongst your friends or even your branch meetings that you go to in your different political parties. So I want to go back to the original question. What is government? And I want you to ask yourself that every time a politician gets on TV and pushes through a new policy that you don't agree with or you feel like you're powerless to push back against. What is government? Government is meant to be we the people, and we are meant to say what the direction that the politicians are meant to take this country and how much power those politicians should have. So please head to our website, australiansforbetter.com. You'll find all our proposals there. Help us spread the word. And if you would like to, please consider becoming a member or donating. It would be much appreciated. So thank you very much. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a break for intermission, and then we're going to come back with our final speaker. And then I also want to let you know about Dr. Christopher Reynolds' book, which I mentioned before. If you would like to check it out, he's going to be our final speaker, and you can purchase a copy of his book. But we'll break for a bit and then we'll come back. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, we'll kick things off again. Now, in August, there's going to be a big gala dinner on the Central Coast being organised by Gerald Mattinson. We're going to welcome him on the stage just quickly to let you all know about it. And we're going to have he's going to have some great speakers there, so you might be interested in travelling down to the Central Coast for a great night. So please welcome Gerald.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, when I lived in the country, 100 kilometres was just up the road, so I'm just down the road, okay, on the Central Coast. Not far away, we used to travel 100 kilometres for anything. But what I have started down there is, I was on the Central Coast Regional Committee for One Nation, and that is now they're setting up branches. That's finished, and I'm no longer on the committee. But what I found is that we had trouble getting speakers or people coming to advance for speakers because we had a One Nation name. So what I started up is Central Coast Conservative Alliance, and so it's non-partisan, and I want to bring speakers into the Central Coast or into the region. I've actually got somebody now in Newcastle who wants to start the same thing and work with me, and also in the New England on the same thing, just so we can have speakers come in and everybody can learn about their conservative values. So I've started that going. And to help me kick it off to this, what I've thought about doing is having a dinner dance with guest speakers. Now, we're all sick of sitting down like we are now sometimes, sorry about speakers here, and just being talked to about what's happening, and then we get up and go home. So I thought, let's have a dinner dance, live music, entertainment, have a full-on night of enjoying ourselves, and we can mingle and talk to the speakers after they've given a 15-minute talk. Then just a short, sharp talk, introduce themselves, and you know who you want to go and approach. And on that basis, I have 6 speakers. I started with 4, but people keep coming to me and want to speak. So I've got Family First coming, Lyle Sheldon. He's going to be the state, and I'm focusing on the state election. So these are the state candidates and for the election, and some of them, and some have been announced, some haven't. But I've got Lyle Sheldon coming. I've got Gemma Nawosi. Now, Lyle's from Family First. Gemma Nawosi is a Libertarian. I've got Craig Kelly, who all know Craig Kelly. He's coming to talk. He was the first one to say yes to come. Second one to say yes to come was Stephen Tripp. You all know Stephen. We've got Stuart Bonds coming. He said yes last night. And I've got Gerard Renick coming. Okay, so it's just down the road. It's full on. It's from 6:30 to 11 at the Mingara Club. I've got pamphlets here to hand out. I do have a website called Central Coast Conservative Alliance. I want you to all look at that and keep in touch, because what I post there is relevant to all the state of New South Wales. I'm putting on stuff for anything for New South Wales election. So just keep an eye on that. as it goes. And you'll see it's quite a comprehensive website. So it's on the 1st of August down at Mingara, and I've got notifications here, and you go to the website and you can book and buy tickets through Humanitix. That's all I'd have to say, except for one last thing. Does anybody know what the Lima Agreement was? Do we know what it was?
Yeah.
Yes? What was it? Yes?
The agreement that was held in Rio de Janeiro about transferring first world country technology and abilities and wealth to third world countries, but it was really an excuse to disempower the first world countries, actually disempower us, the middle class.
And who put it in?
The elites.
Yeah, well, it was Gough Whitlam who went and agreed with it without talking to Parliament, and he was sacked, and then Fraser ratified it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. What was the website again to get the tickets? What was the website again to get the tickets? Humanitix?
I've got the brochures here, look at here, on here.
Yeah, I'll be speaking there, so I encourage you all to come along. That'll be great. you always want to speak to a big audience, so.
Stephen's going to MC it.
Oh, okay. There you go. Okay, so we've got a little bit of a surprise today, which I hope you all enjoy, because we have Councillor Quinton King here, and I've twisted his arm to ask him to speak. Councillor from Cessnock Council. So please welcome Quinton King.
G'day ladies and gentlemen. Well, thank you, that was unexpected, but I'm always happy to talk to people. I think, because I wasn't really prepared for this, so I'll just speak off the back of Stuart there, because I do agree with a lot of his views. On immigration policy, for example, where the federal government sets the targets of how many immigrants every year is allowed into the country, which then influence state policy, which sets housing targets, which then influence local government policies, because we have to approve development applications. The state government gives you a target every year to reach, and then that opens up a whole another can of worms, because if the population is growing faster than we can provide the services to look after people, like proper roads here, for example, you get half-assed, if I'm allowed to say that, projects like Wollombi Road here locally, where they're building a very large development, but there's no proper access to that development because there was no forward planning, right? You've got other developments in the local area out at Huntley, where that goes as far back as 2008, where they knew they were going to build that development, which was a state-approved development, but there was no extra provisions made for schools, hospitals, public transport, all of the essential things that you need. The other issue is, in New South Wales, we tend to see the physical outcomes that New South Wales stand for Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. And areas like ours, well, we're expected to take the, renewable transmission lines through our state forest, and people give up their property so they can power the state. But we don't actually get any of that benefit that the hunter provides to the state coffers to come back to us. For example, again, on a local level, we have a state mandate. So from the EPA, at our tip, we pay a fee to the state government every time someone drives over the weighbridge to dump their garbage. So I'm trying to remember what that figure was. I think $7 million for this year that we have to pay to the state government for using our own tip, and that money was meant to come back to the LGAs where they collected to go back into environmental programs, but it doesn't anymore. It now goes to the general coffers, And when the states sit down, all the ministers and their committees sit down and decide where the money's allocated to in their budget, well, it goes to Newcastle, Sydney or Wollongong. It doesn't come back to us most of the time. So when I first got into council, I was just talking to someone about this earlier, I thought I'd be rolling up my sleeves with my team because we're pretty divided, evenly divided council at the moment. In terms of numbers, so you would think that you go in there, you debate your political opponents on policy, to drive the direction of where we're going. But instead, it turned out the people that actually pulls the strings of which policies we follow is the bureaucratic system behind everything. The people that the general public don't see. Every election there's a new mayor, new councillors, new state member, new federal member, but the bureaucracy mostly stays the same. And I think from my short time and as an elected official, there needs to be some consideration about how that process works as well, because there's a lot of unelected, faceless people driving policy, using politicians as the fall guy. And again, I know everyone loves throwing mud at Chris Bowen, and on a state level it was a very unmemorable guy, the bald guy, Matt something. Matt Keane. Anyway, they're the fall guys. Yes, their ideological beliefs probably line up with it, but the people driving the whole process is the bureaucrats. Until you get the government of the day in charge, clean house like they've done in Argentina, where you get a chainsaw in there and go, hang on, your beliefs are stopping you from doing what the elected members is asked to do by the voters, then you should probably have some sort of an exit strategy for those kinds of people, which comes down to management. Anyway, but because I had nothing to say today, I'm waffling on. But my point is, there's a couple of elections now, like Stuart mentioned, there's a Farrow one on November, there'll be a state election in Victoria, then March there'll be one for New South Wales. So these things, you can see the local impact, right, of election results. So I would encourage, I'm sure everyone here is probably already involved in politics, but get people involved in politics, because no one actually listens until it hits their hip pocket, when fuel prices hit skyrocket or the electricity prices is too high. And then everyone's angry at every single politician they see on television, but no one actually ever attempted to talk to that politician and say, I don't agree with you. I'm going to vote differently next time if you don't change, this policy that I disagree with. So it's everyone's responsibility to let people know, because I personally experience it a lot of the time when people may not always agree with the decisions that I've made in a council vote, but no one comes up and actually tells you, these are the reasons I would like you to vote this way. You know what I mean? Like, I can't read your mind. I go off what I think is the best decision at the time, and public feedback is a very large part of that. So I would encourage you to talk to your representatives, because I know it works, and you can see it now as a very clear example here. Our federal member is having a bit of a barney with the state member over gun laws and our hospital systems. So play them against each other. Make your views known. It's your responsibility to talk to your politicians and exactly tell them, stay on them, make them know your name. And then they know this person comes to me for these reasons. Next time they sit in that chamber voting on a topic, they'll remember your name. So, anyway, thank you for listening to me. I do appreciate everyone's time. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for the host.
Thank you, Quinton. That was good. Now it's time for our main event. You may have seen this bloke online in some clips. pounding his fist on the table, firing up about the Australian Constitution, and that's because he has a PhD in the Constitution, so he knows all about it. If you have questions about the Constitution, you might want to speak to him about it after he wraps up. And also, he's selling his great book here today, which I'm sure you all want to check out afterwards. But his name is Dr. Christopher Reynolds. He is the only Australian to have worked in the US Congress with a lot of notable US politicians such as Joe Biden. He was telling me yesterday, I don't know if you want to say that one out loud, but he did. Mitch McConnell, Terry Kennedy, a whole bunch of them, right? Yep, so a lot of experience. He's worked in the Australian system as well. And now he's turned to history and Australian history and going back to the primary resources, the true accounts, the real documents about our history, not just the stuff that's been regurgitated over the years. So he's a wealth of knowledge. I'm sure you will enjoy this. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Christopher Reynolds.
I'd like to read you something. I can see my phone. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government, which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. A few months ago, I was in New South Wales Parliament House, and I got introduced to His Excellency Sir General Peter Cosgrove. So with a beer in my hand, and Peter and I, started to get to know each other a bit, I then said to Peter, "Now, how'd you get on, mate, being Governor General?" And he said, I went off to America for some funeral or something. He said, and I couldn't say a word. I was the Governor General, but I didn't have permission or the capability to even represent Australia in America. And I said, "Well, mate, it was fun. Glass of beer in my hand. I got a photo." I said, "Well, mate," I said, "that position of Governor General has for a long time been nothing but a cipher. You do what you're told. But," I said, "today, being Governor General is no better than being Mr. Auto Pen." I've got the photo. A few days ago, I don't know where I am today, this must be Belgium, if it's Tuesday, but 2 days ago I was in Hobart and I was having lunch with Erica Betts, a former Deputy Prime Minister, and he's now the Treasurer of Tasmania. And over lunch I said, I was coming out and I said to him, "Eric, I've wandered around Hobart and I said, I don't see any construction cranes." Didn't see any. And he said, "Oh, but that's about to change. We're going to get this great big stadium." Oh. And he said, "But there is a problem." He said, I haven't been allowed to see the contract." And I turned to him, "You're the Treasurer of Tasmania, and you're saying the Premier won't let you see the contract with the company that's actually going to build it?" And I said, "Well, what are you going to do about overrun? I mean, if is there a clause that stops them or a penalty when they decide they're going to increase these incredible budgets?" He said, "I don't know." He said, the Treasurer doesn't have anything to say about this contract." I said, "That sounds pretty unconstitutional to me, that you are in his position." But I've got another story that's just the same if I get around to it. But here is a problem that we have got with government in this country. Now, in the last year, 50 weeks, I did 80 talks like this in 50 weeks. That's about 8,000 people that I spoke to and mixed with. And of course, I'm talking about this book, What a Capital Idea. And this is almost the last of 2,000 copies have been sold across Australia in just that 12 months. And as you can see, this isn't a little paperback. And the reason is that this is the most accurate and most comprehensive write-up of Australia's history that has ever been written. And even when I sent a copy to Jeffrey Blaney, if you know he's been at this for 70 years, he wrote back and said, "My goodness," he said, "the research is unbelievable. I actually learned something. Your mother would be proud." I know, I love that bit. And he's actually reading a chapter I've written at the moment for what I'm doing at the moment on the secret plan behind the New South Wales venture. And you've never, ever heard about what else was going on beside the fleet coming to Australia and how the British brought on the French Revolution. So he's keen to have a look at all of this incredible stuff I've been writing up. It's only a few months ago that His Majesty King Charles wrote to me to thank me for sending him a copy of the book.
Did he read it?
Let's see. I'm waiting for him to write back and say, on page 57. But the last two chapters deal with the Constitution. And I want to tell you a story. In Hobart, in 1867, there was a young fellow by the name of Andrew Inglis Clark, and his father owned a foundry next to the docks, next to the port. And because he was in Hobart, the whaling ships, the American whaling ships, would come in. And he was mixing with the sailors and the captains, learning about American politics. Well, the Civil War was on, it was just finishing in this year. But there was a blockade against the whaling ships and oil and all that sort of thing that goes with war. But there was one ship, the Montgomery, with Charles Hamilton as the captain, who continued to come into Hobart and Sydney and get supplies. And so the day came that the Montgomery pulled into Hobart, and the captain sent word to young Andrew, 19 years old, that he'd meet him in the pub near the dock. And the pub was the Hope and Anchor. This is research trying to find the name of the pub that they met in. And 3 nights ago, I had the great privilege of actually speaking in the Hope and Anchor Hotel. I was beside myself, with this. This is where it was all happening. And it was at that meeting that young Angus listened to stories about Thomas Jefferson and the writing of the Constitution that he said, "I want to go into politics. But to do that, I suppose I better become a lawyer." Well, Dad wasn't terribly happy about it, but nevertheless, the boy pursued his career. He did get into politics, but by the time it got to 1891, which becomes an incredibly significant point in our history, this man had written, Andrew, and said that he was a Democrat, he was a Republican, which was a dirty word back then, Democrats and Republican government compared to responsible government and now sovereign in charge of her empire. But there he was. He knew enough about the American Constitution. Now, when we think about democracy, we often think, it means that the people are going to vote. It's the people's government, by the people, for the people, of the people. Now, this concept of democracy runs all the way back to the Greeks, and it was this idea that it was the populace who were involved in the politics of their country. But just voting and having representatives isn't democracy. China has representatives and votes in their local districts for the next level up to the next level up. Russia also has the same system, so that Putin might be the president, but he's not the leader of the parliament, and the parliament and Putin get elected. But I don't know whether you'd want to call communism democracy. What is democracy? It's not just representation. The democracy that Andrew Inglis Clark and Jefferson and Hamilton and Hume and Madison and so many more were into was English political philosophy that came from names like Locke and Hume and Spinoza, and they were developing this philosophy that was alternative to fascism or even the sovereign control of nations. But as I read through this, and particularly, you end up with this incredible phrase that you've all heard before of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, when it was first written by John Locke, it was life, liberty, and the protection of property, and these were inalienable rights. You could not take them away from your right as a human being. You have the right, it says, for life, for liberty, for happiness, and it is thoroughly Christian. You have the right to life. You have the right to the protection of the court to value your life. And you have the right in court to be judged by your peers. These rights that you have to life. And the courts, the society, will protect that right. We can't just have people murdering other people. It's against the law that protects your right to life. Liberty, liberty, the right to free speech, the right to freedom of religion, the right to own property, the right to be heard, the right to actually for you to have self-determination, to be able to work out and take hold of your own destiny. Happiness, the right to have happiness is a really good concept, but it's an ancient Greek idea that you have, your life is directed towards the pursuit of your own happiness. And so they write it in as a right. You have the right to pursue your own destiny and your own happiness. And of course, property, that you have a right to own property, to sell property, and to determine what you are doing with your property. So you can see why I say, and when you read through Jefferson, it is thoroughly Christian in the way they understand the Judeo-Christian concepts of the value of your life. So with this, young Inglis Clark comes along to meet the people that are going to want to work on the Constitution. If that's for me, tell them I'll call them back later. Now, when it comes to our government at this point, the system of government we have is called responsible government. Maybe you've heard the term. Now, this actually started off in the 1850s, and a great mind by the name of William Wentworth from Sydney wrote the New South Wales Constitution and then took it off to England and he had to wait another year almost to get the thing heard in England. But they considered him, they said, Australia may not have its Washingtons or its Jeffersons, but it has William Wentworth. So that was the admiration that they had for the writing of this Constitution. So he wrote this Constitution that allowed a bicameral system. What do we got here in New South Wales? The Legislative Assembly and the Legislative Council. 36 members would be elected, I think, in the council, and he became the member for Sydney himself when he got back. So we brought in this system where we were allowed to have control to a degree over our domestic issues. There was still a governor and he still would get advice, but who then controlled the governor? It was still the monarch. Sovereignty still laid with the monarch. So when Inglis is getting to this point of this conference in 1891 to do with the Convention on the Constitution, he comes along as a Democrat, but everybody in the room is still tied up with this system called responsible government. But there was another element at play that all the people who call themselves academics that write on this have totally missed. And I wonder why. When I was doing my PhD and I was writing a proposal for my dissertation, I danced along like Noddy to see big ears, all happy with what I had, and I knocked on the door and I showed him my dissertation proposal on the Australian Constitution, and he said, "But where's the money?" And I took offence. The money? This is the Australian Constitution I'm writing on. He said, "I don't care where you come from or what government system you think you're writing on, go and find the money. Because if it's politics, it involves the money." So I went off and I found the money behind our Australian Constitution. And the problem was that the states had sort of been drunken sailors, a bit like our current Prime Minister, and spent money in all sorts of places. And they didn't mind because the English banks were just so pleased to give it to them. And so they ran up £270,000. Now that doesn't sound like a lot today, but we're talking billions of dollars. Anyway, everybody was happy, things were going along, and then suddenly the Barclays Bank, Barings Bank in England, lost money because of bad investments in Argentina. And it was in a lot of trouble, and the Central Bank of England, the Bank of England, bailed them out by borrowing money from the other banks to keep it afloat. How it affected Australia? Out of the 28 banks in Australia, 19 went under. People were running on the banks and could not get their money. There was a drought. People left Melbourne, 40% of Melbourne workers left to try and find work in the mines in Western Australia or on the farms. So the situation in this country was dire. And yet when these people come to write and look at our Constitution, none of them look at the context in which these representatives came. The other thing, of the 42 men that came together in Sydney in that must have been March in 1891, only 2 of them were Australians. And they're going to write the Australian Constitution. Now, the thing is that the people that were sort of pushing this thing was mainly out of Victoria because their debt was massive. So they talked to New South Wales and said, well, listen, mate, how about we form this national federal government and we'll start our federal debt, and then what's happening, we'll actually absorb the state debts. And where Victoria is a little short on a few funds, we can take it from Western Australia or Tasmania to make up the difference and make our payments. Well, New South Wales thought that wasn't a bad idea. I thought, well, Victoria was in massive debt and tried to push for us, or tried to create a national government to absorb their debt. And I thought, well, nothing's changed much, really, has it, you know? So this was the context in which young Angus shows up. Now, the thing is that this conference, where all these premiers and whatever are all meeting, and they're going to have a 1-month conference. Can you imagine sitting here for a month all talking about the Constitution? I couldn't think of anything worse. Well, probably could, but nevertheless, it's got to be up there in the top 10. So anyway, the first day starts, and these fellows get together. Oh, how are you, George? And oh, there's Edmund, of course, you know. And how are things getting on? Oh, here comes Charles. And how are you getting on, Charles? South Australia, right? And what did you call that little town of yours? Oh, Adelaide, of course. Well, you know, it's sort of, you know, it's only 15 minutes or so to morning tea time. You know, what else can we talk about? And while they're all sitting there, young Angus walks in, and he comes up to this illustrious table, because he's just from Tasmania, and they're not going to give him any attention. He's the Attorney General at this point. Well, he walked up to this table in front of these blokes, and he whacks the Constitution on the table in front of them. He'd written it. And this is a copy of what he wrote. And he had written 96 clauses to the Constitution. And they're thumbing through this thing going, he's actually written it. I mean, what are we going to do for another 29 days? He's actually written it. And while they're in shock over him writing it, which he had done, he then says, have you thought about a name? A name? A name? He says, well, you're going to federate and become a nation. Haven't you thought of a name? Well, no, we haven't. You know, this is only day one. And he says, well, what about the Commonwealth of Australia? What? The Commonwealth of Australia? Well, why would you want to do that? Well, that's what Britain does. They have the Commonwealth of Virginia and the Commonwealth of Kentucky and the Commonwealth of Philadelphia. Britain likes the name Commonwealth, so we should become the Commonwealth of Australia. Anyway, Parkes liked it and scratched his head. And while they were thinking about that, Andrew opened his satchel, pulled out an old rag, and he says, and what about this for the flag? The flag, the name, and 80% of my Constitution comes from one man, and I'd never heard of him. There is only one founding father for this country, and it's not Griffiths, and it's not Barton, it's not Deakin, it's Andrew Inglis Clark. And we don't even know this incredible mind of what he brought to us. Now, here was the conflict. How are we going to protect the money? Don't mention it just yet. And the other thing is, well, we like responsible government, not democracy. How are we going to continue to have responsible government? What's responsible government? Well, it's sort of like you hold hands a bit, and the monarch holds hands or talks to the Governor-General, and then the Governor-General talks to the Parliament, and then the Parliament talks back to the Governor-General, and the Governor-General talks back to the Sovereign. Oops, the who? Oh, yes. Responsible government doesn't give you the power, the authority, the right to be a sovereign country. Responsible government is a system that it became a country, we became a country because of an act of the British Parliament. And we were established as a constitutional monarchy. That's a good phrase, they thought, a constitutional monarchy. We're writing a constitution and the monarch can be in charge of the country. Now, the people that were concerned about the money had to make sure that this line about the Privy Council stayed in, because if any of these states start mucking around and doing things or saying no, and it all goes back to the Privy Council or whatever, or they come through us, we can push it on to the Privy Council and they can sort them out, because they will be protecting the British banks. And that's what the whole system was about. But there was a third element. Apart from the money, apart from this business of the philosophy of democracy that was getting stepped on, there were a couple of people that saw an advantage in what was happening. And after Andrew presented this document, and they were all just confounded with what on earth they were going to do next, the Easter long weekend came along. And so the fellow from Queensland, Samuel Griffiths, had come down on his lovely steamer yacht. And he invited half a dozen fellas to come and sort of spend the Easter weekend on the yacht with him. One person, when I got into it, called it a lovely weekend picnic. And I thought, yeah, and how much were you drinking? They called it a picnic, but they did not invite Andrew. He spent the weekend in the hotel, and these men then went over his document. Because, you see, they saw the opportunity for parliamentary supremacy. So while Andrew was up for the separation of powers, which is the judiciary, the parliament and the executive, which extends to the separation of powers between the federal government and the states, They didn't like that. So they decided to take out the whole section on the judiciary, and the Parliament will look after that. Don't you worry about that. We'll look after that. And the other thing is, let us take the legs off the Governor-General. So while this document says that the Governor-General has the power over the military and he'll run the government, they then slip in a clause, 64B, that says, and all the Executive Council people that are advising you shall be members of the Parliament. Oh, wait a minute. So the Governor-General is no longer the executive officer, really, like a president, running the government with his own heads of state. They're called ministers of state, but all of them are going to come out of the Parliament. So it becomes parliamentary primacy, is what the document is that we end up getting. This is an original copy of our Constitution, and as you see, it's a little yellow and it's sort of been wearing a bit over 20-something years. Well, yes, it is a bit yellow and it has been worn quite a bit. So the document ends up with, well, it didn't. Andrew Clark then fought and got the whole section on the judiciary put back in. But they move executive, Parliament and judiciary around, and they put themselves first. So our Constitution says, yes, we have a monarch and it's all very lovely, and here comes the Parliament. So I thought this is Oliver Cromwell, where they cut off the King's head and the Parliament was going to run the country. And that's basically what we end up with. So we now have a system where a Prime Minister tells his cabinet what he'd like to do. The cabinet then tells the Parliament what the Prime Minister wants to do, and then the Parliament then goes and tells the Governor-General what the Prime Minister wanted the rest of them to do, and then he just signs it on a Thursday afternoon over a glass of Shiraz. I know, I've been there, and he just signs it and talks about the weather, or she does now, and anything else that happens to bother her or something. But there is never a question by the Governor-General of the Parliament and what they're doing. We now have a system that's an autocratic system where our Prime Minister can be on a plane and he's going to the UN and he says, oh, I think Australia ought to be pro the Palestinian state. So he puts his hand up against everybody else, against America. Oh, I don't care. I've got the Chinese that are supporting me. I'll put my hand up. Have you read the news lately, I say to myself? Bloody Donald Trump is making the Palestinian state into Las Vegas. He's putting up hotels. He's got a committee. What's the Palestinian state? The Palestinian State Hotel at the bottom of Donald Trump Street? I mean, what are you doing? I mean, he's not going to ever get to recognise, because there isn't going to be one. But he's the Prime Minister, or on the way back he can say, everybody under 16 will no longer have the internet. And that's because if he said it, it will happen. But here, and know this, in our Constitution, there is no such position as a Prime Minister. There is no such position as a cabinet. And there is no such entity as a party. And yet these three elements are running our country. They are totally constitutionally illegal.
What do we do?
Well, how did they... Wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for it. No, later. Now you put me off. They are constitutionally illegal. And yet I say, well, how did we get this position? How did we get a constitution, but it doesn't have these people that are running the country? And they say, oh, convention, dear boy. Oh, convention. You know, it's sort of a bit like cricket, you know. You sort of follow the rules and we do as we've always sort of done. And the Governor-General just goes along with it because, well, all his ministers are members of the Parliament. So the Parliament then says, when he gets a Prime Minister, right, Frank and Bob and Mary, I'll give you ministerial posts, and I'll then tell the Governor-General that, you know, these are the people that are now secretaries or ministers of state. And then these people, of course, as you've heard, get these magnificent jobs. As much as I like Jacinta Price, why would you offer Jacinta Price the Department of Defence? You know, why? But she didn't get it. But they offered it to her, and I couldn't understand the logic. Now, what happens in America? We heard about the bureaucrats, and that's the flaw. That is the real flaw in our system. Because Eric Abetz says to me, as at lunch the other day, he says, talking about what he's doing in the power, he said, I sat down with the Secretary of the Public Service, and I said, you're going to cut all these jobs, I'm cutting back the budget. Oh, Mr. Minister, I can see this is a great idea, and I know they might be a little upset with the 5% usual growth per year that they're going to spend on their their trips across the world that they need to do, but I don't think we really ought to be just cutting back like that. And Eric had a bit of an argument with him, and then he said, if you don't do what I want, I will find somebody else to do it. Oh, well, if you put it like that, Minister, I can see that we probably could cut back some jobs and some money. Eric said he had to threaten the man to get him to do what he asked him to do. The bureaucracy, these mandarins of control, the faceless, nameless, overpaid, can't sue them crowd that are earning phenomenal amount of money are telling these ministers what to do. Why do you think we can get these dingbats, but for want of any other word, that get to be the minister for X, Y and Z? He rolls up and he says, I've got all these great ideas. That's lovely, Minister. We've got this 3-year budget plan, and we promise that when the budget runs out and you still have a job and we haven't changed government, we promise that we will consider to put it into the next lot of plans. I've been in the room when they've said this. And these poor fellas that get elected may come in with these great ideas and they're going to get to do nothing. In Queensland, we got Christofouli, David Christofouli, nice man. I'm standing there next to him and I said, David, we need to do something about education. Yes, you're right, he says. I said, we need to teach history and civics. You're right. And I want you to do it, says David. And I said, oh, that'd be great. I am still waiting for the phone to ring, because the moment he got in, then the bureaucrat said, oh, Minister, it's really nice that you're here. We have a few things on the agenda, and start singing the usual song, and David can't do a thing. Minister, we've got this big stadium, and we just have to get you to go along with all the other things that we've signed on your behalf. And David is just locked into this thing whether he likes it or not. We have a massive problem with bureaucracy. What happens in America with this? When every time there's a president, they change the secretaries of state. Not just the top guys, but they get rid of what they call the level Cs, which is the next level and the next level are all out the door. You only have a life of 4, maybe 8 years in the bureaucracy, not here. We are in a mess. And as I've travelled across the country and I listen to people, I said to somebody last week on a podcast, I said, it seems to me we don't like the government that we've got. We don't have the government that we've got, and we don't have the government that we need. It's only a matter of a few weeks ago that the South Australian election was held, and 160,000 people, registered voters, didn't even bother to show up to vote. And another 50,000 people just put crosses and did donkey votes. That's 200,000 people that didn't take up their right to actually influence those elections. And across the country, people are losing their enthusiasm for this country. We're losing, and for good reason, because we've ended up in this system. I call it the Woolies and the coal show, where it doesn't matter, it seems to me, which party gets in. You know, nobody actually gets in and, like Donald Trump, has a pile of blue books that he's signing to get rid of policies that are no good. They just move in and the bureaucrats take over and continue to run things. So where on earth do we actually really get a change of government? Oh, we've got to play for the middle road. We've got to get the middle vote. Well, that's great, but where are your values? Values? Have you ever thought about democracy? Democracy? No concept of life or liberty or happiness or future or prosperity. There is no leadership. There is no vision. There is no concept of prosperity. When Lachlan Macquarie was governor, by 1810 to 1820, the population of this country increased by 300%. And I thought if we went from 25 million to 75 million in 10 years, I mean, we'd freak out. I mean, that's insane. How on earth did he do that? Because they had a vision of prosperity. Where is ours? He didn't have a public service either, yes.
No, but he had public banking, didn't
He brought in public banking. He introduced the Bank of New South Wales. He brought in money. He brought insurance for shipping. He built docks. 200 buildings went up. Oh, yes. He built the infrastructure. Government built the infrastructure that allowed commerce to develop. And that was that it was still a vision that they shared together with prosperity. No, wait for later. So with this vision, where is our vision and where is our leadership? We are in a mess. There is no doubt about it. When I see there's people on the street in their thousands protesting about Australia Day, what on earth is happening? We are in a mess. When I hear that the greatest cause of death of young men under the age of 34 at the moment is suicide, and I don't know what to do. I mean, the people are so hopeless. They're so depressed. They have no concept or hope in their own lives. Young men would commit suicide. What on earth has happened to our country? Ladies and gentlemen, this book, which is a rewrite of Australian history, and it's a factual write-up of our history, needs to be read. You think you know Australian history? I would strongly doubt it until you actually see the real facts. There wasn't any invasion. There wasn't a bullet fired by a military person against or killed an Aborigine in the first 27 years of the colony. And then when a group of renegades were causing a lot of trouble, and the night one of them cut off Mrs. Lewis's head was the line in the sand for Macquarie, and he sent 3 regiments out to get that particular group. But there wasn't any fight, there wasn't any, frontier wars, but the Aborigines moved into the colony in Sydney within 2 years, and Arthur Phillip was made an Aboriginal elder and given the name Wallawari. Why don't we know that about how incredibly universal, how synchronised this country was right from the beginning? And we've been told such rubbish about our history. You know, with our gold rush, this was the greatest gold rush in human history. 150 ships pulled into London in 1852, and 40% of the world's gold was coming out of this one place. We became Britain's greatest commercial accident, and the prosperity was unbelievable. You and I stand on the shoulders of great men and women who had tenacity and hope and faith and built a nation. But the children, our children, are to stand on our shoulders. What is it that we pass on? Ladies and gentlemen, this book is a book that had to be written. And now it is a book that needs to be read. God save the King.
Okay, everyone, that concludes our event today. So thank you for sticking with us. Hopefully you got a lot of important information out of today's event. And if you are hungry for more, please head to our website, australiansforbetter.com, and you'll see all our proposals up there. You can sign up to be a member. Please join us so we can continue this fight and can continue this work. And if you are even more hungry for information, please head over to the table here with Dr. Reynolds and get a copy of his book. We will We'll all be hanging around if you want to come up and have a conversation with us. So it'll be a pleasure to speak to you all, and safe travels home. Thank you.